Hello and welcome to today's webinar on the US space tech and space economy. My name is Thomas Moschig and I'm the head of Advantage Austria here in Washington, D.C. Today in times of stagnating economy or stagnating economic outlooks, we want to talk about a market which is very interesting and very impressive in terms of growth numbers. The global space sector is growing faster than ever, transforming from a government-led exploration into a vibrant, innovation-driven commercial ecosystem. According to local experts, today an estimated 75 to 80% of space economy leads back to commercial actors. And space technologies also influence everything basically around us, from climate monitoring to communication to security, to AI-enabled operations. So you will notice also on your smartphones that we have satellite technology in our everyday use. 50% of the apps we're daily using on our mobile phones, they require satellite technology for operation. And given this importance, in today's session, we'll explore together with two distinguished guests how new players, new capital, and also new technologies are shaping the future of space economy in the US and also beyond. And obviously, this is very important for us today, what this means for Austrian industry and research players alike. Yes, we have two exceptional experts today on the webinar, and I'm very, very happy that both agreed on participating today. First, we have Kelly Geddes-Ogborn. She's a leading space commerce and innovation strategist who helps companies and countries compete in this rapidly growing global space economy. And then we have Christian Federspiel. He is a well-known stakeholder in the space tech industry, not just in the US, but also in Austria. I'm sure many of the participants today in the webinar also know him. And in our perspective, he's a great Austrian role model for companies who are eyeing on the US space tech market. We'll listen to both experts approximately for the next 40 minutes before coming to a more interactive part where your questions and your comments are highly welcomed. Yes, just some quick housekeeping rules from my side before leading the stage to our experts. Questions, we discussed this. Please feel free to write your thoughts or your questions into the chat window also during the presentation of our two experts. We will collect them and discuss them at the end when we have a Q&A session. Also, feel free to like or to comment questions posted by the others. This way we know that the question might be relevant to other users as well, and we will prioritize them at the end. Otherwise, if there are no likes or comments, we will just discuss them in a chronological order. Also, as you're used to it in our previous webinars, this webinar also will be recorded and published on our YouTube channel on the Wirtschaft Austria. And at the same time, it's worth mentioning that we obviously respect the data privacy of each and every participant, and no participant info will be shared publicly. And last but not least, our speakers agreed today on sharing their slides with you. So after this webinar shortly, we will collect the presentation and also the recorded webinar, and we will send it to every participant registered with us today. Yes, having said that, I'm very happy to introduce you to the first star of the show. Let's get started with Kelly. She's our first expert and was just recently introduced to us, which I'm very, very happy about that we made this connection. Kelly Geddes-Ogborn is a recognized leader in space commercialization in the US. She's an innovation strategist and she's evolving global space economy. Until recently, Kelly served as the Vice President of Space Commerce and Entrepreneurship at the Space Foundation. And previously, she held senior roles in aerospace and tech companies, including President and COO at Advanced Rocket Corporation. With a background in aerospace entrepreneurship and government industry collaboration, Kelly has advised startups, investors, and public agencies on how to turn cutting-edge space technology into viable commercial ventures. She has also worked and developed national programs in the US supporting space startups, capital investment, and workforce growth. and is a frequent speaker and commentator on the dynamics of shaping the new space economy. Yes, currently she's engaged in a series of independent projects focused on advancing space and defense technologies from a technical capability to scalable market applicability. And in that function, Kelly will give us an overview of why space economy is a market we should look at. And she will also explain the shift from a previously government-led to a now commercially driven space market, as well as current trends and opportunities arising for Austrian enterprises. Yes, Kelly, the stage is yours. We'll be listening to your words, and thank you again for being with us here today.
Thank you, Thomas. Guten Tag. Hello. It's an honor to be with you all today, particularly in this very, very interesting time in the space community, as Thomas highlighted all of the various ways in his opening. The way that I look at it is there has never been more interest, activity, and engagement in space ever before. There are over 92 countries that have an active satellite in orbit, and we have been steadily moving beyond economic hype, so just statistics and promise, and an ecosystem primarily focused on individual missions and tech development to one that is more now about systems growth and market maturation under pressure. We are starting to stress test business models. We are flying technology at what feels like an operational cadence. And we are starting to see a resurgence of capital diversified across all different markets, which is signaling to us a return of investor confidence in not only the space ecosystem, but also in its commercial viability. Next slide, please. So what this presentation is meant to do is to give a high-level primer in the 20 minutes that we have together to really be able to localize a bit what we talk about when we say economic value and where we are within this commercialization arc. We'll talk a bit about some space economy drivers, so really what's driving future growth. And then I want to focus the bulk of the conversation on some structural shifts that are really critical within the ecosystem. The reason I mention them as structural shifts and not just trends is because these elements that are really happening and occurring globally are fundamentally changing the way that we engage in space and how partnerships and opportunity are going to be shaped in the future. And so they're really critical to understand because they're going to be a major part of how you engage and how your strategy evolves over time. Next slide, please. Next slide. So I want to start with this figure, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. The global space economy has been valued anywhere from $1 to $4 trillion by the year 2040. And currently, within 2026, various estimations have it somewhere between $613 billion and $626 billion. So we are not too far off. I think, though, that while it is important to have this number as a marker to what the opportunity is, you really need to start to dissect it to understand what's making money now and what's being built in the future. When you think about the space economy, it really is a continuum. And we are at the point now where we are starting to see economic return, but we are trying to mature the elements that are going to grow to reach that 1 to 4 trillion. Next slide, please. So when we talk about what's actually making money now, these are some commercial revenue subsectors that the Space Foundation, as Thomas mentioned, I just recently left, used to quantify their number of $613 billion. The easiest way to look at this chart is on the left side of the screen. These are commercial infrastructure and support industries. So these are things that enable space. So this is the upstream pipeline. And on the right side, the commercial space products and services, these are things enabled by space. So this is the downstream pipeline. So when we look at the left side, when we're talking about upstream, it's things like satellite launch, satellite manufacturing, insurance premiums. A lot of folks sometimes don't realize that the insurance industry is a really major and critical component of the space economy, primarily because, payloads and systems are very expensive. We have ground stations and equipment, which is a very growing sector, primarily to keep pace with the amount of satellites that are being put in orbit. We have space situational awareness, on-orbit servicing, which is continuing to grow. We'll get into that later. And then commercial human spaceflight, which has started to gain more traction over the past couple of years. In 2025, we saw about a 500% increase over this area. So these are some of the main sectors that we count in terms of enabling space. The biggest thing to take away here is this is only responsible for 1/3 of the space economy, which is kind of remarkable because when you think about these elements of launch, of satellites, of human spaceflight, these are generally the notions that people think about when they think about space. But when we are talking about economic value, the bulk of it is actually the space to earth market, so the downstream market, and what space enables for us, not just in space-based assets, but also in new industries and adjacent industries. So the commercial space products and services is responsible for 2/3 of that economic activity. And this is things like direct-to-home television, position navigation and timing, which very clearly underpins GPS, financial transactions, sort of anything you do with your phone, satellite communications, satellite radio, Earth observation, and then increasingly growing space-based data services and direct-to-device that we're going to start to see potentially with Starlink down the future. The reason why I wanted to break it down this way is to really localize that the space economy is attainable. It is an element that underpins so many aspects of how we engage in daily life. So for a lot of companies that are thinking about where their insertion point and where their breakthrough point, there are often a lot of elements that they are already engaging with and helping grow the space economy that they may not have realized before. Next slide. So before we get into some of the future growth areas, I do think it is very helpful to spend some time talking about this commercialization arc in space. So as Thomas mentioned in the beginning, space is steadily moving from this domain of primarily government-driven, government-funded, government-run, to one that is about 78% commercial when it comes to the revenue posture. However, we do need to talk about the fact and the role of what government has and what government will continue to have as we move forward. So there is no such thing as a purely commercial space market. The reason I say that is the government is still primarily right now the anchor customer. They are setting the direction, they are setting the pace, they are giving confidence to other markets and private capital to want to invest. But we are trying to transition out of that with new business models where the government is one of many. And where we are right now in this commercialization arc is this trend toward commercialization. The easiest way to explain this, and some of the other industries that I like to compare it to, is if you think about the cell phone industry and the aviation industry, for example. Both of those started with really heavy government intervention. So these were industries where the government really kind of grew it out of a necessity for their needs. Then those industries started to trend toward commercialization and diversify what it is they offer. And then they started to open new markets that were never considered before. If you think about your cell phone, for example, how often now do you use it for other things outside of making a phone call? That is what we are pushing for with space. We are currently at this trend toward commercialization where we are building the infrastructure, we are building the platitudes, we are building the relationships to have a self-sustaining ecosystem to then open up new markets, open up new access, open up utility. And it's going to take a lot of capability and a lot of capital, but that is really what the focus is now, is how do we get to that end pace with opening up new markets? Next slide, please. And next slide. So when we talk about new markets, I am a firm believer that the future of the space economy is going to be rooted in these familiar segments, but defined by emerging markets. So much of what we do now is built around satellite capabilities. It's built around ground stations. It's built around what rockets bring to bear. But all of these emerging markets that are starting to go from these ecosystems of demo to scale are going to be extremely critical test beds and also scaffolding infrastructure for new players to take advantage of that never thought space was part of the equation or gave them access before. So what I've highlighted on the next two slides, next slide, please, are 10 main drivers of the new space economy. This is not an exhaustive list by any means, but what this is meant to showcase are the anchors themselves, so things that, the industry thinks about. But what I want you to start to envision are all of the downstream and upstream capabilities that these enable. So for example, with launch, what we are talking about here are technologies and infrastructure to send payloads to low Earth orbit and beyond. But there are really transformative applications in terms of new propellants, in terms of fuel, the necessity for more capacity and infrastructure to launch. And so just to enable that vertical requires so many new industries that have never really been considered before. When we talk about satellite internet, so we all know that the satellite equation is continuing to grow. By 2035, there's estimated that there's potentially going to be 53,000 satellites in orbit. Currently, there are about 10,000 active, and there are already 20,000 plus licensed to be launched. So we are entering an era where we are going to have more ubiquitous data and access than we have never seen before. But then how do we qualify and quantify that data? How do we get it to new entities? How do we make sure that when all of these different satellites are up there for connectivity, there aren't collision points? How do we maneuver? What can we do in terms of benefiting from artificial intelligence for satellite manufacturing and scale? All of those questions come into consideration for this one. When we talk about deep space exploration, this is looking at, humans and missions with cargo beyond the Earth's atmosphere, so Moon, Mars, and beyond. Beyond the technology parts themselves, this calls into question a lot of deeply human aspects. This calls into question nutrition, biometrics, environmental assessment, creature comforts. When we think about sending humans to environments that we have very little data on and very little ability to actually be able to speculate what those engagements are going to look like, how do we keep people sane? How do we keep people healthy? And how do we ensure their mission success and progress is really effective? For lunar landing, when we talk about sending people back to the moon, of course, it's about the mission itself and the astronauts, but it's also about infrastructure. So when we are looking, particularly with the Artemis mission, which the launch just got delayed by a couple of months, but the primary goal is to send people back to the moon, partially to do it, but really it's to create sustained infrastructure for research development and to use it as a launch pad to other orbits. So how do we actually build things there? This is going to require different power sources. This is going to require new ways of additive manufacturing to be able to create parts without having to ship them from Earth. There are a lot of questions that go into how you actually sustain infrastructure on a lunar surface beyond physically getting there. For Earth observation, imaging, tracking, and analytics of technology, this is a really emerging area primarily because it's not only further enabled by what we can do with satellites, but we're starting to realize that there are a lot of ways that this can benefit other areas. Earth observation is really critical in things like agriculture, tracking wildfires, tracking floods, tracking natural disaster elements. This actually also plays a really critical area in an area called parametric insurance. So for example, if there's a catastrophic event, in a particular city, insurance practitioners can now give specific quotes that are more precise and actually help the community as opposed to speculating what the potential damage could be. Next slide. When we talk about asteroid mining, so what this is looking at is technologies to extract water, rare minerals, and metal from near-Earth asteroids. I would not be doing my job correctly if I did not say that there's a lot of focus on asteroid mining from some companies, primarily for a pure monetary gain of collecting platinum on these asteroids and bringing them down. The business case for that is not closed yet, primarily because the cost of the mission set is not offset by what you can actually yield and bring back down. That will happen at some point, but what we are focused on right now is how do we then take Earth out of the equation? So when we are able to get water from space, when we are able to get rare earths from space to be able to manufacture, it completely changes the game on what we can do for in-space applications, particularly around lunar infrastructure and other areas of construction that we need to do in low Earth orbit. Space debris is another one for a couple of reasons. It drives a lot of policy and sustainability and design conversations, but there is also a lot of space entrepreneurially, particularly also with the inclusion of artificial intelligence about how you track, analyze, and really maintain a space that is sustainable for the utility that we want to use in space. Space tourism is continuing to grow. This is sort of suborbital flights. I think some of you might have seen recently that Blue Origin stopped their suborbital flights to particularly focus on the lunar infrastructure. But there are still companies like Virgin Galactic, which are still doing research and some sort of tech development in these areas. But what this is more focused on is access for private citizens for other types of programs. So eventually, when commercial space stations come online, which we'll talk about, part of their business model is to also offer this as an opportunity for individual citizens to go and take advantage of outside of, just researchers or other trained astronauts. In space infrastructure. So again, this is talking about taking Earth out of the equation. When you can assemble in space, when you can manufacture in space, when you can repair in space, when you can refuel in space. I like to refer to this as like the scaffolding that we are building, that layer of infrastructure, really critical infrastructure in low Earth orbit that is going to allow more utility than we have ever considered before. And that's really going to open up a lot of opportunities. And then the last piece on this is space stations. So I think a lot of you on this call know that the International Space Station is getting retired. It is old and it's sort of run its course. And right now it's postured to be retired by 2030. NASA has put out a bid to replace the International Space Station with private space stations. And so there are a handful of companies that have been given that bid. The goal is to make NASA one of many customers. So NASA will continue its research projects and transition it to these space stations. But now what these are going to do is allow private companies to be able to take advantage of them, research institutions, and really open up access to entities that maybe didn't have it before. Why these are really critical is this is going to open up new business areas in things like precision manufacturing and pharmaceuticals. So a lot of people don't know, but there have been drugs, for example, an osteoporosis treatment that was accelerated because of the conditions in space and fast-tracked through the FDA in the United States to get it into the hands of patients quicker. The conditions in space allow for better drug development at a component level. They also allow for better precision machining because of the lack of gravity. And so these are going to enable fundamentally different industries to now take advantage of what space can do for them and start to accelerate supply chains and also build resilience into these supply chains. Next slide, please. So now in the time left, I want to focus a bit on some of these structural shifts. Again, fundamental markers that are changing the way that we engage in space. So with the lens of what the space economy is, what's actually making money, and where we are looking to grow these critical areas for future elements, these are all the places that come into the strategy about how to actually do it. So first slide, please. I first want to mention industry trends and capability growth. We'll talk a bit about the market environment. We'll talk about the moon, geopolitics, and then economics and infrastructure as an endpoint. Next slide, please. So with industry trends and capability growth, the biggest takeaway here is that we are now starting to look at maturity at scale, normalized launch cadence, and really routine and expanded private activity. The biggest thing for me is that launch really stopped being a bottleneck, and it also stopped being a headline, which is quite remarkable. If you think about even up until 5 years ago, anytime there was a launch, it made the news because it was a very significant event. We are now globally launching once every 28 hours. And last year, we were launching once every 34 hours, which really shows the significant uptick in just how quickly we've been able to make routine launch part of the collective. SpaceX, hit a new record with 165 orbital launches in 2025. And what we are also starting to see is a diversification of the types of rockets. So Blue Origin, for example, its New Glenn had 2 very successful launches, which is going to give another alternative to SpaceX's rocket, the Starship. And then we're starting to also see other countries put forward their first commercial missions for sovereign capabilities. On the commercial side, I mentioned the ISS being, transition, but that has been accelerated. And we are also now starting to see private crewed missions becoming more routine. The biggest thing here for me is that in that private space station and private space mission, it really stopped behaving like a concept and started behaving more like an industry. And people started to recognize that, which is really remarkable. On the satellite side, we talked about the number, but it's also important to say that over 60% of all satellites now are commercial, and it's going to continue to grow. And what we're also starting to see is an average lifespan of about 5 to 7 years. So this reusability, this routine, this mobility is really built into the collective mindset. And then on the new frontier side, just the growth and utilization for things like artificial intelligence, data centers, in-space manufacturing, we are just starting to scratch the surface on what this is going to do for future growth in the industry and how it's going to become part of the integration calculus. Next slide, please. On the investment side, as I mentioned, private capital is surging and expanding. We are very much in a bullish market, but with smart capital. So a lot of investors have learned their lessons of the past and are now making more calculated and educated risks. In 2025, we saw $55 billion of investment, but diversified. So looking at everything from early stage to PE and corporate financing. And we've also saw some really heavy IPOs come out. So, public offerings of space companies, Firefly Aerospace, Voyager, and then York Space just IPO'd last week. And SpaceX plans to at the potential valuation of $1 trillion. The reason why this is significant is that what it shows to us is that this is a scalable, viable market, not just by people in the space community, but also by investors are understanding that the commercial applicability and also ability for them to make money and companies to scale is real. And that's a really important signal to send if we want growth. Next slide, please. When we talk about the moon, so there has been a decisive shift in lunar engagement. And we've started to see a diversification from primarily, single mission, national prestige, to one that is more commercially enabled and internationally shared infrastructure. The things that I want to point out on this slide primarily is at the top, lunar activity has been expanded to private companies. In 2025, we saw 4 different missions to the moon. United States companies and iSpace, which is a Japanese company. And so the cadence, the urgency, and the necessity to engage the moon as an ability, but a proving ground to bring other payloads of companies is increasing to grow. We're starting to see signatories grow, from a shared standards and norms. There's the Artemis Accord within the United States. There's now up to 61 countries. And China also has its version, which is the ILRS, which is up to 17. And for me, the most primarily important shift is that we're moving from flags and footprints to infrastructure driven. So there's more reliance on commercial and we're more logistics focused. So we're looking at things now like surface mobility, power, communications. So really, how do we create this sustainable infrastructure through multiple capabilities that's going to allow us future growth? Next slide, please. So geopolitics, and it is important to mention that, space is now very much seen more so as a warfighting domain, but also critical infrastructure. This has been driven by increasing global tensions, administration shifts, and capabilities accelerated by near-peer adversaries globally. I won't exhaust this list. As Thomas mentioned, you will have access to these slides, but I do want to point out two critical things on it. What this drives at is new ways of partnerships and also sovereign capabilities. So within the United States, we have a push for the Golden Dome, which a lot of folks are saying it's the Iron Dome for America. From a strategy perspective, what this has triggered is that a lot of our primes are now starting to rethink their strategies with more of a focus toward, these layered systems and how can they actually take advantage of these dual use areas. And I'm sure Christian will touch on some of these. And we're also seeing a focus about how countries, can maintain superiority. We had an executive order about American superiority, but we're also starting to see it, like Japan, for example, published its first ever space domain defense guidelines. And so countries are starting to realize that the commercial and exploration activities are still primary, but defense is a close cousin, and how people engage in space is really critical because economic security underpins national security. One thing I will say about shifting priorities and relationships is traditionally, alliance-based relationships were on shared values and norms, and that certainly still exists. But now what we're starting to see is strategic alliance-based resilience or capability-based multilateralism. So what that means is strength through shared capabilities, shared infrastructure, and shared growth, which is really going to be how a lot of these relationships build over time. Last slide. And then the last thing I want to leave on is just to really, really highlight that we are now at a place where adjacency, so these other industries, stopped being talked about that way and are really critical and directly plugging into space and the space economy. There is a major emphasis on spaceport expansion. So, really, how do we give access to orbit as an infrastructure, not a service? And governments are now really starting to prioritize launch for civil and commercial payloads. Systems are no longer just seen as rockets, but they are now strategic logistics assets. And globally, and particularly in the United States, a lot of this is also tied to regional economic development and this supply chain resilience. Space stations, are reframed as industrial platforms. Major, because again, not just seen as a hobby, seen as an industry. And then the last piece is that data sovereignty became an economic issue, which is really interesting marker. So before, we've engaged with data and space linkages in many different ways, but we're now starting to have conversations around data custody, cloud jurisdiction, AI trainings, and what this means for economic competitiveness, which for folks like me really signal that this integrated layer of how all of these come together and underpin economic resilience is everything from a systems to a monetary return. And so very interesting time, lots more to, monitor, but these are just some of the trends and some of these critical structural shifts that I wanted to highlight. Last slide, please. So I want to thank you for your time. I know that was a lot of information, but I hope it gave some good food for thought for a robust discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly, or Dankeschön to you in that sense. Great presentation. And at the end of the webinar, we will have some time to get back to some of the remarkable numbers and statements you mentioned. Yes, and now also looking at the time, I'd like to, without any further ado, welcome our next expert, which is Christian Federspiel, pioneer at the intersection of artificial intelligence and space technologies. He holds an MSc in computer science, high performance computing, and AI. In 2007, he co-founded the software company Catalysts, which is today known as Cloudflight, which grew from 0 to more than 1,100 employees and successfully exited for around $550 million. Not just that, but since 2020 has been the chairman of Aurora Tech, a new space company operating 20 thermal infrared satellites in orbit and backed by more than $65 million in venture funding. He's also an investor in several space and quantum technology ventures, including Spire Global, which achieved a $1.5 billion exit. And today, as the CEO and co-founder of IC, which stands for Impact Space Expedition and Exploration, he applies AI to space security. So Christian builds bridges between corporates, investors, and global markets. And in today's webinar, he will share his insights on the space tech ecosystem, how to market and how to drive growth in this challenging but also highly rewarding industry. Christian, we're very happy to have you on board, and the floor is yours.
Yeah, hello, good morning and good afternoon to wherever you are listening to us. Can we switch to the next slide, please? So, as Thomas already said, now I'm working for IC, and what IC is doing. AI is transforming space operations, and in a way, AI eats software. So this means that also AI eats space security software. And what IC does is it is combining AI with a physical-based digital twin and orbital data set, and therefore delivering validated intelligence. So this is what IC is doing. And therefore, the US, when you can switch to the next slide, please. The US market is very important to us because that's by far the biggest market in the world. So I broke down my presentation in those 6 parts, and Kelly gave us a very fantastic overview about the US space economy. It's mainly dual use. So it's important, I think, for Austrian companies. What is your approach to get to the first, let's say, 300, 500,000 or even $1 million to get in a real contract, in a customer contract? I tell you our story, so how we did it, and maybe you find, or hopefully you find a better and a faster way, but this is how we currently did it. It was not easy. You're running against a lot of glass walls. You have to stand up and try another way. But yeah, in the beginning, everything started with US advisors. So that was the seed on the US soil. Then to really set up an initial network, doing that over the most important conferences. Then we found us in the jungle of US programs and got very confused if we're eligible to those programs. But we ended up at very important or interesting US partner companies, and that was our chance, and we took that. And when you then are in a partnership with one of those growing US companies, you need, in a way, a go-to-market approach to really get to your first contract. And then it's quite important how your legal structure is. So this is what I will tell you in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. Good. So for us, it was very important to find a European advisor who is at home on both continents. So in our case, this was Rainer Horn and also Bülent Altan. I don't know if you know those guys. Rainer Horn is a partner at Nova Space. Bülent Altan was at SpaceX and has now his fund, Alpine Space Venture. They're both on both continents, and they helped us to set up our initial network. So then the next important step was to find advisors, especially in Washington, because the people in Washington, they're extremely good informed. They know everything, what will happen, because every large space company is in Washington. They meet all the time, and you get a lot of important information. So they don't tell you what's already in the newspapers, but what will be maybe in the newspapers in 1 year from now. Then the space industry is mainly in Colorado. So just think of it, it's common sense. When a US company wants to get to Austria, you're a well-known player in Austria, you know how to get to contacts at the FFG, how to get in programs with ESA. So you need somebody in Colorado who really tells you where are the interesting programs and where are the top space companies. In California, so in Los Angeles, there's this program creation. So whatever all those programs Kelly told you, many of them were developed in Los Angeles, so in the Los Angeles wider area. And then it needs somebody who is in a way a cowboy or a cowgirl who really gives this program a chance and makes a technical implementation. You can find these guys in Albuquerque, New Mexico. So it's good to have a wider network all over those states in the US. And that could be CEOs or former CEOs, and of course, Space Force or Air Force people, and of course also consultants, for example, like Kelly is. I hope, Kelly, this is not wrong what I'm saying, that you're a consultant, but you're helping also companies setting foot on US soil. And then, of course, it's quite important that you're also getting into some accelerators. Typically, accelerators want, in a way, shares from your company. But there's one accelerator. This is CDL. It's the Creative Destruction Lab, which helps you with more than 70 mentors, especially for the US market. Next, please. Good. So to get to your initial network, there are 3 conferences which are really important for you. So that's the SAT show, the satellite in Washington. It's in March or end of March. It's all those conferences last about a week, and attend those conferences only with your advisor. The advisor, you just, in the first year, you don't need to plan something for the conferences, just be with them. They're meeting so many of those space people that you typically get introduced to about 80 people within those 4 days. In the evening, also follow your advisors to those parties or receptions. They don't go to not to just one party, but really try to get as many parties as possible. Just get to an intro, say hello, make your pitch, get to a business card and write those guys later on and build a relationship. So when you do that for a year, you will end up at about 300 contacts to the space industry, mainly in the US. And and that only costs you 20K, because 3 weeks later, you will find all those guys again at the Space Symposium. And in September, you will find all those American guys in Paris and sit together in the autumn sun with them. So now you have, after 1 year, you have quite a good network, and now you have to offer them something. And very important for all those conferences, don't spend your time at all those presentations, but really talk to the people and follow your advisors to make as many contacts as possible. Next, please. Good. Then the next important thing is you will learn, when you talk to those guys, you will learn so many things about programs. So there's this real jungle of all those abbreviations. So the DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit, SpaceWorks, FWorks, the Rapid Capability Office, and so on. So it's very hard to find out if you're eligible. Most probably, as an European company, you're not eligible to all those programs, because a US company is defined that the ownership, so people who hold the shares, this must be more than 51%, much often more, US citizen. You have to have a board where only US citizens are in this board. And when you're in the dual use sector, then it makes really sense that your CEO is also a US citizen with a clearance. Much more important to all those programs is that you have to select a partner. And the partner should be already in a so-called phase 2. All those programs are phased programs. It's very different to European contracts with ESA or with the FFG. So that means that once your program is, or your project is done, then you maybe have a follow-on project. But in the US, the project or the program always continues, and the companies in there being prime, they get into more and more money. But it's very important to understand that in those programs, your partner, your prime, has always a cap, and they only can grow with you, or they can only grow with partners who bring in more value. And ideally, these contracts never end. So it's important that your partner has a phase 2, for example, Sibiu contract at SpaceWorks, because then you are eligible to also attend in this program. And let all what the prime is doing, let all the lobbying and consulting do the partner. And to get to a real good partner, so rule of thumb, this is about 1 year. Next, please. Good. Once you found a partner, you, in a way, have to convince, of course, first the partner that you're valuable to him, but then you have to convince one of those customers. So all these DIU, SpaceWorks, what's the name of these companies who are the customers? And you typically do that with a white paper, and a video and a one-pager. Go to your partner and speak there to multiple people to find out how to connect best with them and their product. And then build a prototype at your own costs to really show that how you can integrate with the partner's product, iterate the solution, present it to the management, and also show it to multiple people on the partner side. Then you end up with, let's say, in a way, with a final marketing kit. So you have then a white paper, and you have multiple videos, and your partner can then go to their customers and disseminate this information. And and at the end, when you're doing good, you will be very, very fast ending up in a project, and where you get some customer requirements you can already then work on. Good, and then of course you have to start working, and that's also, I think, a bit different to European companies. US companies help you to also in the beginning with their own money to partner with them. And already startups with around 40 people, they are able to get to contracts in the US with more than 10 million, even going up to 30 or 40 millions, even when these companies are only 3 years old. So that's a huge difference to European companies, and they help you with their own money to partner with you. Of course, when you bring value to them and to grow with them. Next, please. Good, and then it's in best case you get then to your first requirement meeting, and then you find out that they are not allowed to tell you any of those requirements. So this is then where the legal structure comes into play. So you have to have this, like we have it in our company structure. We are, and our mother is a US company, and the ICUS company is a real US company operated by US people, and where we delivered US technology to US customers. And so here it's very important that you set up over time a US board, that everything what you are operating in the IT infrastructure is in the government cloud. It's documented what you transfer to Europe and back, that you have a so-called SSA. Sorry, I don't know what's the abbreviation now, but this allows US people with a clearance to talk to your people. And in a way, communicate requirements at the higher level. And yeah, and of course, you also have to have back-to-back contracts for the IPOs, and this must be all handled in this legal structure. I think and at the end, let's say after 2 or 3 years, you will end up in a so-called FOKI mitigation. And this allows then the two companies from Europe and from US to work in many, many fields together, share requirements, share documents, and also in an ITER compatible way. Yeah, I think that was it in short. Thomas, I hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Christian. This was an excellent insight into your work and a very helpful guidance, I believe, for our companies, how to tackle the market and how to get literally speaking, your foot on the ground in this market, which is not a conventional one. Before tackling some of the questions the audience might have, so please feel free to insert the questions into the chat window. I just quickly wanted to draw your attention to one of the next highlights we are having here in Washington, D.C. Christian already mentioned that making connections and being at important shows here is very important. And Washington is, although not a manufacturing location, but it's a very important hub for space economy as well, for other different reasons. You have a lot of decision makers and a lot of informed people here in the capital of the US. And having said that, Christian also mentioned the Satchel Week. We are hosting a so-called learning mission, Zukunftsreise, in Washington, D.C. and in the state of Virginia on satellite technology, which is a 3.5-day learning program on space tech and space economy, made to measure for Austrian enterprises along the sat tech supply chain, who are eager to learn more about the market and eager to find these contacts, find these advisors, and find more guidance how to appear in the market successfully. The event takes place from March 23rd to 26th March 23rd to 26th, which is also the same day where the Satchel Week takes place. Obviously, we want to make use of it and visit the Satchel Week, but we will also want to visit the most important, or some of the most important corporates here in the US in the space tech sector, like SpaceX and Amazon Leo. And also we would like to meet aerospace prime contractors, universities who have great studies in technical fields and association in this area. So don't miss out on this opportunity. We close the registration at the end of this week. So if you want to learn more about this, make sure to click on the link. I mean, obviously the link is not available for you at the moment, but I've seen that my colleague placed the link of the event into the chat window. I also see that some of the participants of today's show, they will be in DC, which I'm very happy about. Or also you can click on this, or you can scan the QR code to learn more about the mission. And yeah, having said that, we would be very happy to meet you here and give you guidance on how to work on this very challenging but rewarding market. So having a look at the chat window, let's see if there are any questions out there. Still, you have the opportunity to ask our experts something. What I would be really interested in is obviously having now you two guys here is, I mean, there's a lot of money involved in this market, as we heard, but let's say there's no limits in technology or funding. What would your best bet be, or best guess be? What kind of technology or what kind of solution will have the greatest potential to shape the future of space economy? Maybe Kelly, you would like to tackle this. What is if you had to decide for one, what is the sector you would place your bet on?
It's a great question. I love the lack of technological limitations, because I think it's an important point, because I'm a very pragmatic, practical person. And I think that what's actually going to enable growth is less the technology and more the integration of all the things. So I'll answer your question and then I'll say a quick note. I think that technologically, AI truly is going to transform so much in space. So I mentioned it primarily in the presentation, about how do we quantify and qualify all this data that we're getting from satellites? But we're now starting to see AI go into mission planning, go into, design and manufacturing of satellites to keep up with the scale. There's now, utility being put in space to support all of these future activities. And so I think we're just scratching the surface of what this is going to do writ large. I would say where I would place my bet outside of the technology is more in the integration component. What's really going to enable scale and growth is when we start to do infrastructure stacking, right? So all of these component layers that individuals are building, and when they're actually coordinated in a way that creates this layer of infrastructure, that's really what's going to give a lot of economic value.
Thank you very much. Well, AI was the bridge to Christian. What is your take on that?
Well, I would place the money where I place currently my money, and this is in space situational and domain awareness. Because just think of it, maybe in the 30s, there will be 100,000, maybe 200,000 objects up there. And they all want to be in a very small band, let's say, or altitude band, 500 to 650, something like that, because that's fantastic for Earth observation and sat communication. So it will be very crowded, and you need to have, besides all the AI, you need to have trustable data.
Absolutely.
And this is what is most critical for the SDA community.
Thank you very much. And since I've mentioned the SAT Week, who of you guys will be in DC during the end of March?
I will.
I will be at the National Space Symposium in Colorado Springs this year, not in Washington. My colleagues will be there.
Amazing. So we'll have the opportunity to meet, and our participants would have the opportunity to meet as well. And yeah, obviously, in case our participants will not be at these events, we will also be happy to share Christian's and Kelly's contact details, if you don't mind, also to engage with our two experts maybe after this webinar. Yeah, so okay, being cautious with your time and also seeing that there are no urgent pressing questions at the moment, I would like to come to the end of this show. Also, preciseness is important in space tech and space economy, so we are about to close precisely at 11 a.m. local time in Washington. Let me spare some words of appreciation. First of all, a big thank you to our experts, Christian and Kelly, for sharing your insights, very valuable and very practical insights for our companies. We're very glad to have you on our network and to count as you as a speaking partner, not just today, but also as a contact person for future space-related questions. Thank you in advance for that. And also thank you to the audience of today. Thank you for joining us and your interest in space tech and space economy in the US. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this hour. I hope we can welcome you in DC, maybe for our learning mission or maybe at another occasion. So yeah, having said that, this marks the end of today's webinar. Once again, this recording is being edited, and we'll upload this along with the slides and the contact details of our experts. And yeah, if anything, please contact us if you want to learn more about the learning mission or other details about the sector. We'll be very happy to assist you. Once again, thank you very much. And yeah, have a great day or a great afternoon, depending on wherever you're listening to us. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.